Hey everybody, how's it going? Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Wanted to do something a little different. I don't usually do breaking news, but I wanted to try to do a little more regular content, and I thought this one was pretty important. Seen a lot of ridiculous things around this topic, and so I wanted to go ahead and dig in with it. And the Prudentialist was kind enough to join me. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
Always a pleasure to talk with a Prudentialist. Of course, if you are not familiar with his content, you should be visiting his links, which are below. Make sure you're checking out his Twitter and his channel and all those different things. But to just go in then on what our topic is going to be today, I'm sure many of you are already aware that there was an attempt on the life of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. So let's go ahead and just start lining up articles to put this timeline together because we're going to expand on what this was and what the media and Democratic politicians' reaction was, and then kind of what the implications are of all of this. So, as we can see here, we had a man arrested near Brett Kavanaugh's home. He was attempting to, or obviously allegedly attempting to murder Brett Kavanaugh. He arrived with a knife, which I believe was a Glock 19, or sorry, a gun, which was a Glock 19. And then he also had like zip ties and different things. So obviously he was equipped to do some damage there. It was late in the night when he was arrested, about 1:50 a.m. Now, you think that obviously this would be the biggest story in the United States because not only, sorry, Glock 17 there, as we see, Glock 17, but not only was this man heading to do serious harm to Brett Kavanaugh, but he was doing so after some pretty extreme rhetoric from the left. The President of the United States, the spokespeople for the President of the United States, had made it clear that they did not like the position that had been leaked, that is for the decision that is supposed to be coming down, that could possibly overturn Roe versus Wade. And they used some very extreme language about how people should feel about that and how they should be responding. They also encourage people directly to break the law, which we'll go into a little further. But first, I want to go ahead and get Prudentialist reactions. Were you surprised at all that this kind of thing happened? I mean, we obviously knew that there were protests and different things at the homes of Supreme Court justices, but did you believe it would escalate like this?
100%. Yeah. I mean, between what happened in 2020 and what we saw in the North with Canada in regards to what the media had driven up, sort of gave carte blanche to activists and protesters to escalate and take extreme actions. So whether it's mostly peaceful protests in the summer of 2020, the burning downs of numerous churches and parishes in Canada, with basically carte blanche permission, I just view this now really as just state-sponsored domestic terrorism by the left.
Yeah, we've definitely seen the permissiveness, and we know that what that inspires, right? And so do the people running the country, right? There's a whole very thin veneer here of law and order that's getting scraped off with this, because obviously we know what happened with the BLM riots, and and how much was ignored with that, how much the crowd was placated or actively was actively supported by people on the left, and their actions through things like lack of prosecution or even active efforts to bail out perpetrators, that kind of things, favorable media coverage in the face of overwhelming violence and property destruction. All of these things were, of course, big features of the BLM riots. And once people watch that kind of thing in the middle of a lockdown during a pandemic, you start to realize that the rule of law is not really a thing in your country anymore. But of course, once we saw then the events of January 6th and how, you know, the reaction was obviously off the scale then from the media, a much smaller protest, a much more physically damaging or much less physically damaging and much less there are far few people hurt and killed in that protest, despite the very different outcomes, very disproportionate anger and hatred and legal retribution from the federal government, the media, law enforcement, all these things. And so it's very clear kind of what the standard was, right? That we've moved from a situation where at least most people felt like law enforcement was relatively neutral. Obviously, we all know there's corruption. We all know there's selective prosecutions, those kind of things. That's always going to exist on some level. But this was very wide scale. It was a very wide scale announcement that if you play for the right team, you get to break the law. If you play for the wrong team, any small step out of the box will get you destroyed. And even we look at the things like the parents who are protesting at their children's school board meetings, getting investigated by the FBI, and it becomes very clear that even if you aren't breaking the law, there's a very different standard for you. Your freedom of speech, your ability to protest, all those things are in no way protected. And so we kind of knew that this level of permissiveness with aggression, physical aggression, especially with mobs on the left, was going to continue. So after the decision leaked, of course, we saw large protests on the lawns at the homes of justices. There were left-wing organizations that leaked all of the details about the justices, where they lived, personal information, how they could best be harassed, all those things. Multiple people encouraged this, including, of course, the White House, which is a problem because, as many of you probably already know, let me bring this up here, there is actually a federal code against this. So let's see. I'm sure many of you have seen this before, but I want to bring it up just so people have the reference here. So the code reads, whoever with intent of interfering with, obstructing, or impeding the administration of justice, or the intent of influencing any judge, juror, witness, or court officer in the discharge of their duty, pickets or parades in or near a building housing a court of the United States, or in or near a building or residence occupied by such a judge, juror, witness, or court officer, or with such intent uses any sound truck, any of that kind of stuff, that they'll be punished with no more than 1 year or a fine, or both. So any of this stuff is explicitly illegal. It violates federal law. So the White House was directly encouraging a violation of federal law. And there's even video of people like AOC being asked, are you okay with the violation of law? And they said, yes, no, it's fine. They have the First Amendment, even though it's direct violation of the law.
Yeah, I mean, this is just basically giving carte blanche to friends and go ahead and target your enemies and act accordingly.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, the law, people will say, well, shouldn't you be able to protest these things? And the answer is, of course, no, when it comes to direct harassment of judges, because that was the purpose of leaking the document, right? The document was not leaked by a justice who wanted it out there, or a conservative justice. It was obviously leaked with the intention of bringing a campaign against the conservative justices, trying to get them to change their mind through intimidation. So the people amassing on the lawns of these houses are obviously there for a very particular reason. Theoretically, the judicial branch is not supposed to be subject to democracy. It's the least democratic branch of all of them. It should be immune from politics. At least that's the theory, right? So even if I'm not a huge proponent of the kind of the current understanding of constitutional separation of powers, but if you are, even then, this is a bad idea, right?
Well, yeah. And I mean, even when the opinion was leaked, the Politico had a Twitter thread about what this was supposed to mean. And they themselves had said that this was clearly unprecedented. But in the history and procedure of the court, justices are allowed to change their opinions prior to the official releasing of the opinion. So, I mean, this could easily have been, the logic was pretty much basically, oh, well, this doesn't mean it's set in stone. You essentially can protest and intimidate them and change their mind, regardless of the fact that it goes against federal statute. And I mean, this is really, to me, the realization with a long series of other events that get swept under the rug when they're applied to regime appropriate targets. I think also about the GOP baseball shooting that happened a few years back where Steve Scalise was almost killed.
Yeah, absolutely. People obviously, again, don't talk about this enough, but we do have examples of direct attempts on the lives of politicians, and they are mostly by left wing activists trying to take out, Republicans and that kind of thing. So, as we all know, the left right now is ginning up a lot of hatred towards the right, especially when it comes to things like federal law enforcement. They are explicitly saying, just yesterday, the president of the United States went on Jimmy Kimmel and joked, in air quotes, that you should be able to arrest the GOP if they don't do what you want, right? Maybe you can play that off as being on a comedy show, but a day after someone attempts to assassinate a Supreme Court justice, you think that the language would be dialed down, but of course it isn't. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the language that was used here, so people can understand. These are just some of the more mild ones. These aren't even particularly. But here we can see Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, says, to my friends in the LGBTQ plus community, Supreme Court is coming for us next. This moment has come to be a call of arms. Now, you might say, well, that's just the language of, again, that's just the rhetoric. It didn't have any particular violent meaning. And in saner times, maybe you could make that assertion. But we've seen. Do you remember? What, it's got to be over a decade now, when Sarah Palin had that flyer that had targets drawn over the faces of Democratic politicians, and everybody lost their mind.
I do, yeah. That was one of the big things that they had hit her for, Rachel Maddow and almost everyone at the time.
I think it's when the one Democrat was shot. Gabby Gifford, I believe, was her name.
Yeah, Gabrielle
And then,
Giffords.
yeah, and then after that, they ended up searching for anything that they could kind of say, encourage that. I don't think she was specifically on the flyer, but obviously they were just trying to rope in anything. Now, obviously, we know, again, hypocrisy. No, it's hierarchy. The left gets to do this. The left gets to say what it wants. It gets to make these kinds of rhetorical calls, and the right doesn't, because the left controls the media and they're able to hold someone's feet to the fire. The right has, at best, one news station, and so they're just not going to have that kind of leverage. But we can see that this is far from the only example here. We had Harry Reid with something that I think is a little more damning. Let me share that real quick. And Harry Reid made this speech when he was talking about the Supreme Court ruling.
I think you mean Chuck Schumer. Harry Reid hasn't been Senate Majority Leader for a few years now.
Yeah, there you go. Sorry, I meant Chuck Schumer. Yes, thank you.
And they're taking away fundamental rights. I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions.
Now, again, in saner times, maybe that's benign rhetoric. Maybe you could say it's not a huge deal. But, again, if any Republican used that language, they would have the FBI knocking on their door. They would be the subject of investigations. They would be forced to resign. They would be a danger to democracy. Guys like Chuck Schumer can get on stage and talk about the price that Supreme Court justices are going to pay, and it's seen as not a big deal.
Well, at the same time, right, we have to keep in mind that they're already doing that. We already had a candidate running for governor in Michigan from the Republican primary be arrested because of his attendance on January 6th of 2021.
Yeah, and they tried to keep Marjorie Taylor Greene from running for re-election due to her connections. They've attempted to silence a number of Republican politicians, and obviously then also guys like Steve Bannon. And who was the other Trump advisor who was recently held in contempt, I believe? He was just arrested. a few nights ago.
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Yeah, I can't remember his name right away, but yes, it's unfortunately becoming a very common thing. Obviously, these investigations and media attacks are being directly weaponized to silence the right, silence Republicans, reduce their ability to run, reduce their ability to voice opposition. I think it was just on MSNBC a few days ago. They were you had people, different news anchors who are specifically saying, right wing radical, domestic terrorists are a big part of the GOP voting base, right? And so they are, directly trying to say that basically if you oppose the Biden administration, if you oppose the progressive movement, you're a criminal, right? You're if you're not one of these violent people, you're linked to them. At the same time, they're burying the fact that their own rhetoric and their own attempts to ratchet up and escalate the tensions is directly actually producing exactly what they're talking about. Let's take a look at one more tweet here that Skeptical Waves actually sent both of us before we move on. If you haven't subscribed to Skeptical Waves, you should obviously have done that by now, so you can listen to all the cool types of books that we're talking about when we talk about different theory. Let's see here. Simon Nguyen, and obviously, talks about the trolley problem. Basically, if you're already terminally ill, why wouldn't you just take out Supreme Court justices, right? So this is, this is obviously a direct call. It's couched, slightly as a hypothetical, just to keep it from immediately getting knocked down. But again, if you were on the right and you posted this on Twitter, you would be destroyed. Your account would be nuked from orbit. There would be no hope. I don't even think this person was forced to delete this. So this is a relatively common thing for the left with this. And so we see not only is the left encouraging this stuff, but they're also burying, like I said, this story. Very few websites and newspapers were running the attempted assassination of a Supreme Court nominee or Supreme Court justice over political issues. Very few of them were running that as front page news, or certainly below the fold, or a couple pages back, or it was not treated. This would be the only thing that happened in the United States for months if it was going the other way. Again, we don't want to sit on the hypocrisy. We know why this is happening, but it is truly stunning that you can have a radical left-winger step out, attempt to literally take a shot at a Supreme Court justice over their political positions, and then have the left immediately, without hesitating, pivot back to calling the party of extremists and domestic terrorists and all these other things.
I want to say that I'm surprised, but I don't think anyone in here or your subscribers or chat is particularly surprised by this either. I think that this has been a lot of the frog in the pot being boiled slowly, but now we're finally sort of getting very close to that boiling point, and we're now just beginning to realize how hot things are, or at least maybe in the mainstream. I do feel that for many, I think Luca Cacciatore had made a tweet saying something along the lines of, like, every dissident Twitter account is saying the same 5 things, like they lie to you, they want you dead, etc., etc. Like, well, we say all these things because they're true. And I mean, we just have more and more evidence to document how true that is. They want to suppress any likelihood of resisting this, whether lawfully or violently. Although no one here condones violence, and you shouldn't be doing that. You should be following the letter and spirit of the law. But it does illustrate, I think, to a significant degree, that this is just one more piece of evidence that we have that things are getting very unstable very quickly, or not unstable, but perhaps unstable from what we would traditionally call the norm or the rule of law, because this does just clearly show who's in power and that they don't mind the consequences, because, as our favorite bread tubers will tell you, these people are acceptable targets.
Yeah, and not only are those the only 5 things dissident Twitter accounts say because they're true, they're also the only 5 things you're allowed to say, right? Like, that's really important thing that people sometimes don't understand. Like, if you want an active Twitter account, if you don't want to be relegated to the echo chambers, then you have to keep things within certain bounds. You have to reveal as much truth as carefully as possible. And so when we're looking at this stuff, like you said, it's very clear that it's all friend enemy. That's how these decisions are being made. Not only that, but it's very clear that after the left felt the power of unleashing the mob as a tool of control during the BLM riots. This is something I was saying on Twitter. The mob is a very powerful tool because you don't have direct accountability, right? The mob loosens itself, like, unless you find a smoking gun, like, oh, here's the call from Chuck Schumer to the BLM organizers to like start loading up Antifa with Molotovs. Like, unless you have that direct call, it's kind of a nameless, faceless, right? They just kind of say the things, they set the rhetoric, they wink and nod at the right organizers, and all of a sudden U-Haul trucks show up to the right places and things happen, right? Nobody had to tell this guy. I'm very sure you're not going to find a letter from Nancy Pelosi ordering this guy to go attack Brett Kavanaugh. But what you will see is the White House press secretary saying, yeah, you can put irate mobs right out in front of the homes of Supreme Court justices. You can scream at their children, you can do all of this stuff, and you could do that 24 hours a day, and we're not going to do anything about it, even though it directly violates the law. It doesn't take much for you then, as a member of the mob, to infer that you get to push the envelope. Because remember, guys, the like public political action in this way, like organized public mobs, this is always a tool of those in power. It is not what you've been told this story about how politics was changed from the ground level by these protests and this kind of thing, and they got together and they no, these things are demonstrations of the regime's power. These people feel empowered and able to gather in the manner they do because they know the regime's not going to do anything. In fact, the regime is actively supporting them. They know who the regime isn't supporting. It's the kind of people who show up to a January 6th event. And so it's made very clear to these people, even if it's not actively explicit, that you have a lot more room to maneuver. And so you get people riled up enough, you use the right language, you put them in front of the House of Supreme Court Justice, and you just let time and opportunity kind of do the job for you, right? And you get to deny that you had any, you were connected, you had no culpability. So that's really nice for politicians. But like the Prudentialist is saying, once you've done this, it's a clear signal that the rule of law and order is over. And so it's a nice short-term tool, because you can say, oh, well, you have to do what I want, or I can send this mob and they can't trace the mob back to me, and I can get to you at any time because like this person isn't directly connected to my office. But it also signals to the rest of the country that there is no rule. Like it's completely based on your political whims. And that means that the social fabric is pretty much done at that point. You have no moral authority. It's just power and your ability to manipulate the mob all the way down.
Yeah, that's exactly what this is that this is the clear line in the sand, that this is about, the ability to wield power. And it doesn't even have to be directly. Like, we know that we're all in congruence here. It doesn't require a signed order to XYZ, heads of these organizations to do it, because there's a political goal in mind to accomplish this. And they know that even if the politicians say this and say, oh, they get arrested, depending on where they're at, there's going to be, very friendly district attorneys that are going to waive prosecution or use prosecutorial discretion to do so. We saw this a lot in 2020, which sort of also put a lot of attention on who was funding these progressive district attorneys. And it does illustrate that there's quite a cabal of people, to use that phrase, that can fund and effectively organize and show up where they need to drop off that U-Haul trailer full of bricks or pallets of, wherever they need to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where, again, you don't have to explicitly send out, the email that has the blow by blow. You have enough of a network that kind of understands what's going on, that once the nod happens, they can reproduce this result. But of course, the danger is always that this gets out of hand, right? That's it is in essence riding the tiger. They don't have perfect control over these people, and yeah, you can crack down to try to like make sure that things don't go one way or another, but things can get very out of hand very quickly. This is playing with an extreme amount of fire on the part of the regime, especially when you're aiming it at the highest seat of one of the three branches of government.
Well, it also really depends on if there's overlap of damage or material harm to also perhaps your donor or your sort of your tax base as well. I recall that there's been a recall, I think, in California with regards to a district attorney because of the easy positions on crime that had led to a skyrocketing rate of thefts and assaults. And once you start hitting your own guys, then you have to clamp it down. But again, I think this is why the concept of the spiteful mutant or Spandrel's bio-Leninism is really important, because it's a really wild and unwieldy tool to use. But as Spandrel put it, once you kind of tell this crowd of people that are ready to commit and unleash violence, it's very easy to tell them, if you don't tell us, if you don't do what we tell you to do, we're going to go back to 1950 and all of the progress you've made is gone. I mean, we've seen this time and time and time again, whether it was Joe Biden during the 2012 re-election campaign under Obama, where he was telling black voters that Mitt Romney would put people back in chains. Even now, most recently with the Roe v. Wade opinion that was leaked, the discussion of going back to a pre-Roe world where women can't work or go to, have to be back in the kitchen, the usual whole, barefoot in the kitchen, pregnant kind of deal. It's always been that time and time again. And virtually, I think what this is showing us is the culmination of all these different ideas coming together at this focal point where pretty much it's the hat's off, the mask is off, and we have state-sanctioned violence now against political opponents.
Yeah, this entire system, like you pointed out with the bio-Leninism, this entire system, this inversion of hierarchy is created because what you're creating is a coalition of people dependent on the state, right? You want your coalition to be entirely dependent on the state for it to maintain its status and its ability to live in its current way. And so, which becomes even more important as conditions degrade, right? As we see inflation skyrocket, as we see the ability to buy homes, plummet, as we watch, the bottom end falling out of the supply chain and all these other economic pressures, these people who were already on the margins and felt like they were only being held in place by advantages granted to them by the state feel even more vulnerable. And so it becomes much easier to convince them that, the right, Republicans, conservatives, whoever, MAGA, whatever, these people are going to just, pull that last, Jenga block out and just make the whole system tumble. And so they again are willing to just do more and more extreme things with very little prodding. Because they can feel kind of the pressure, that they can feel kind of the heat on their back as kind of the system starts kind of coming apart around them, and they know that their entire position is essentially tied to the system and its inversion of hierarchies.
No, exactly. 100% is that also once this has been given, right? This is what I always find so interesting when I hear from perhaps foreign commentators that say that like the American decline is not as visible, or it's not as coming as what they think. And one of the things I heard recently was that in places like Shanghai and other places, the places where Americans have embassies at, that the line for a visa is always like around the block. And it's just like, well, that doesn't mean that should be your only metric to show how things are going. I mean, clearly here we've got a two-tiered system where the state will literally look the other way and allow people to have, attempted murder on their lives, whether it's congressional leaders or, justices of the highest court in the land. And here we are. Here's the real home life situation. This is that if you don't hold these opinions, then you're likely to be targeted. And the same thing we're seeing now isn't just applying to like MAGA and otherwise. We also saw this with Virginia, where Asian and Ethiopian parents were also being investigated by the FBI because they were raising concerns about how the CRT stuff was affecting them and leading up to the election of Governor Youngkin. it just shows really to me how far we've gone in a very short amount of time. Like, we knew this was coming at some point in time, but really the lid's been flipped very quickly.
Yeah, that's why I named the stream, the left accelerates, because it's very clear that we're crossing some lines that the left doesn't know how to stop itself from. Like I said, the power of the mob is, once you've used it, it feels like it's the solution to everything. Especially as you kind of the regime's soft power is falling apart because it can't offer benefits the way it used to. It can't build the patronage network it once had. It can't maintain it. All it can really offer is social credit, and that has diminishing returns as material conditions degrade. And so when your soft power is kind of coming apart in the seams in many ways, especially they're just cranking the volume up to 11 on everything and they're just not getting the same results they used to, then the mob seems like the answer, because yes, they have control of the police in some level, that kind of thing, but it's not what they want it to be, right? They're very hesitant to use force. When they use it, it's very sloppy, it's ugly. They are foxes, not lions, after all. And so the mob seems like the solution, right? Well, here I have this kind of force that I can apply whenever I want. That can't really be traced back to me. It won't be held accountable, or the few people inside of it that will. Once kind of the dust settles, they'll be written off. They'll be given early releases. They'll plea down, and basically, I can just use these people as a hammer to any solution, or to any problem. Solution to any problem I have. But like I said, that really degrades everything over time, and they're really not going to be able, I think, to have that level of control as long as they want to. But of course, as they're releasing this, as they're kind of unleashing these people, they're also accusing the right of being what they are. And that's the nice thing about having hegemonic control over kind of the consensus making apparatus, is that you can whip up your supporters into a furor. You can send them onto, to the houses of Supreme Court justices, have them directly threaten the heads of another branch of government. And then you can turn around and say, well, actually, the right are the ones you need to be worried about. And we're going to have a literal show trial to tell you that they're the ones that you need to worry about. So let's take a very telling tweet right here, I think. I'm going to put this one up real quick. So this one is from a left-wing account called The Recount. And they say, one of these channels is not like the other. And it's showing all the major news networks, and then Fox. And Fox is the only one that refused to show these January 6 hearings. Now, whatever you feel about what happened on January 6, it's kind of weird that we're having a trial in prime time produced. They went out and got like an ABC News producer to put it together to make it more compelling, to put it into prime time. So what we have here is a literal show trial. Like the word show trial is supposed to be pejorative, but they've literally designed the trial and placed it into prime time with a producer to make it sexier and more scary, to compel and scare voters to think that, there's some kind of insurrectionist movement inside the United States.
Yeah, Charlemagne and I were on with Patrick Casey yesterday covering that, and it was probably, if it was meant to be primetime television, it was the most boring thing on God's green earth. And thank goodness at least Tucker Carlson was going to at least give us his, infamous Tucker Carlson live reaction to things. But it is important to illustrate that, yeah, like we're clearly making the use of primetime television. I think they literally got the guy who did 2020 and Dateline for NBC News to do all that as well. And we have to tell people that, no, your real enemy is the guy that drove all the way from like Hastings, Nebraska to go protest electoral shenanigans, not the fact that, your downtown city center or your state capital was basically burned alive in that same year and continues to do so, right? Like we've noticed through the election of these progressive DAs being, easy on crime, that things have escalated across the country. And we're still trying to blame the usual people for this uptake in crime, whether it's in regards to the violence we've seen against Asian Americans, whether it's the skyrocketing amounts of theft that we've seen in California, and even in where I live in Texas, it's gotten just as bad. Where, oh no, concerned parents are the issue, but we're not going to do anything about our rising cost of living and homelessness problems throughout the interstate embankments, but we're also going to make sure that the cops get called on people that protest their, protesting the fact that children are being taken to drag shows where in neon it says it's not going to lick itself.
Yeah, it's of course very insane that they're trying to get people to focus on one event years ago in a place that's very far away from them and is very relatively mild compared to what was allowed to happen around the country for months at a time, while at the same time trying to get them to not notice that inflation just hit a record high. I think it was like 8.6%. Of course, that's not a real number, but it's the number they'll admit to. You can't get baby formula, you can't get all kinds of other essentials through the supply chain. Like you said, there's rampant crime in your area. People aren't getting prosecuted for theft, homelessness, violent attacks. You're just supposed to ignore all of this, and you're supposed to focus on the fact that the My Pillow guy didn't like the outcome of the election, and that's supposed to be the most serious threat to our sacred democracy. But I wanted to show one more thing here on the stream, which was this article that came out from the AP today. Now, again, remember, this is only 2 days removed from a literal assassination attempt on a conservative Supreme Court justice. And again, I kind of want to point about how serious that is. Obviously, the riots are very serious, right? That's no joke. Normal people's lives are ruined, destroyed. People were killed. People had their businesses burned down. But you have to understand that this is kind of a different level because this attack was directly on, again, one of the heads of the three branches of government. This is a very clear message to anyone who isn't in line with the regime. Even if you are at the highest levels, we can and will kind of wield this kind of power against you. This is not, some Walmart burning down somewhere which can kind of be swept under the rug. This should be again, headline news everywhere for months, even if it came from someone on the left who is doing this. But of course, just 2 days after this attempt on the life of Brett Kavanaugh, we get this headline from the AP. And the AP's headline is, of course, from the Department of Homeland Security, saying white supremacists are rallying up thousands on social media. So this just after the media, the White House, and Democratic politicians literally just use their rhetoric to radicalize and actively send a violent domestic terrorist to attack a high-level government officer. They then print a article saying literally just the exact opposite. And again, this is the power of having that hegemonic control of the news media, because for those who don't know, local newspapers are basically dead. The ones that are still alive have vastly reduced staffs. This is where my journalism experience was. I wasn't at the highest levels. I was at I was a beat reporter at a local newspaper, churning out stuff. And look, we made heavy use of the AP wire. We didn't have a big staff, and so I was writing stuff on local politics and crime. We had a sports guy, and we had a social events guy. Like, we have people in different areas. But anything national, you're basically just copy pasting off of the AP wire. And so the AP is not just writing this article; they are basically writing the script for the news for pretty much every publication across the United States and many broadcast and TV outlets. So when they write something like this, they are setting the journalistic agenda for everyone.
And this isn't the first time that they've done it either. Let's keep in mind that it's been over a decade since the AP news style book changed, where they were no longer use the term illegal alien. So undocumented immigrant was sort of the one that they started to take on. And this is, again, more proof of what they're capable of to set the agenda, so to speak, and what a concentrated minority can really accomplish if you hold the levers of power.
Yeah, the AP style book is quite a piece of Orwellian technology. In fact, just a few months ago, when the decision was first leaked, the AP style guide, the AP guidance was basically this: if you're talking about trans people, then a man can become pregnant. But if you're talking about the abortion issue, a man cannot become pregnant. So it's Schrodinger's biological assertion, right? It's basically if you're writing, they literally put down in their style guide, if it helps our political agenda, then women can have or men can have babies. If it hurts our political agenda, men can't have babies.
Yeah, Schrodinger's woman strikes again in
Yeah.
regard to this.
So let's take a look at the article itself, because there's some pretty kind of funny but also terrifying things in here. Of course, they first point out that the FBI are saying that that these people are accusing the false flags from CIA, FBI. They immediately link the possibility of shootings to, of course, all the no things, all the evil things that you'll get asserted with. They also warn about the phrase "white boy summer." So Chet Hanks is obviously a driver of serious domestic terrorism, I guess is their implication there. Anyone who uses that phrase, it could be very serious. Let's see. Oh, yes. You have to worry about snarky memes. Memes are extremely dangerous. Anyone sharing memes is, of course, suspect. Trendy videos, also a problem. And, of course, it's anything where you might have a differing opinion from the regime on abortions, guns, immigration, and LGBTQ rights. So basically, political opposition makes you a possible security threat. That's literally just right there. If you have any of these opinions, you're a red flag. If you have any of these opinions, if you're sharing any memes, if you've got any videos that are trendy, then you could be one of these people that Homeland Security is worried about.
Remember, kids, if you tap the sign, the FBI is going to come looking for you.
Yeah, you got to be very careful. Those viral memes can be a serious problem. Don't make sure you keep your sign close to your chest. Don't. Let's see.
But yeah, that's the other thing too, is that this is sort of the next step, right? We had the weaponization of the IRS. I mean, it's been politicized for decades now as the primary tool to target political opposition whenever you have power. And now that's sort of that complete, hostile takeover of the government by ideologues that only move in one way, right? Our sort of Hydra Cthulhu monster, whatever you want to call it, is in all these various offices, not just in government, but in academia, in media, and now, as the libs of TikTok have shown, even preschool and elementary school, grade teachers. Now, we have to start really finding other ways to crack down on people. And I think the AP Newswire is showing a very good example of that. And I think the ADL had also came out with one saying that, these evil people are just really, really polite.
Well, then you are the most suspicious person on this platform, sir. If politeness is a indicator, then I think everybody needs to watch out for the Prudentialist. So yeah, here's some more here. Of course, this one's particularly sinister. They signal their beliefs with things like a Christian cross emoji. So there's been a number of these recently, and it's really sinister. It's very clear. There's been a lot of pieces written in the last couple of weeks talking about Christian white nationalism and how just Christian nationalism. They even dropped the white part from it. Just Christian nationalism. So if you're a Christian and you also believe that you should care about your country, very suspicious, right? They are very clear about going after Christianity on a regular basis, to the point where now, if you signal the fact that you're a Christian publicly in any way, that is something to be worried about, right? Of course, we also have to worry about the term pilled. So no more black pills, white pills, clear pills, red pills, guys. That obviously, and of course, then if you have any opposition to things like Roe versus Wade or any of these other decisions, if you support gun rights, those are all very, very dangerous positions for you to have. But what do you think about that, Prudentialist? The increase on the pushing of just basic signaling basic Christian beliefs. It's no longer about, oh, they're radicalized, it's connected to some other thing. They're now very willing on a regular basis to say, if you display any support of Christianity, you practice Christianity, you're publicly Christian, then very scary, very dangerous, probably a threat to democracy, need to be investigated by the federal government.
Well, what I will start out by simply saying and quoting from sort of the Beatitudes that just, blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and say every false thing against you because of him. So keep that in mind. But at the same time, this is just concretizing who your targets are. I mean, they know that people who don't vote for them, people that don't agree with them are sort of, as this phrase kind of goes, sort of your founding stock or your OG stock of the country, about just, your middle of the country, white Christian people that, have been, routinely been getting the short end of the stick by the regime for decades now, and got really riled up when they finally had someone that was willing to speak for their behalf, like Trump. It got the attention of so many, white working and middle class people that this was their avenue. And now that they've got the guy out by whatever means necessary through political violence and so on, that we have to make sure that these people are a target. So if you have a cross in your profile or your bio, or if you're like our good friend Anglo Ortho, because that report literally did have the words like Christian symbols or the word Anglo in it, then you're going to be the target. And this is really just the concretization and sort of the codification that, yes, officially on paper, per all of our documentation, you are the enemy of the state. And it's no longer like it was in the 1990s with that Will Smith movie where, liberals were concerned about, surveillance and privacy. No, they will happily do that. And they will happily encourage your children through TikTok to, if you go to a protest or if you share some spicy memes, you'll see Reddit threads about how do I take Fox News off my parents' cable box, or I, reported my dad to the FBI because he was there on January 6th.
Yeah, that's particularly sinister. Of course, every totalitarian government eventually knows it has to go after the family. The family is the last barrier to the total state. I've made a video about that. If you guys want to watch it, about the total state versus a family. But every kind of dystopian totalitarian government requires eventually the demolition of the family, because the family is kind of the last organic hierarchy that can protect people from total control by the state. And so they need to undermine the connections of the family. We already see this, of course, in many different avenues, but one is certainly the constant media barrage and propaganda barrage delivered particularly to children. You can watch just normal, very milquetoast basic Republicans who just want lower tax rates for corporations or something, get utterly destroyed by their children on social media. Their children will happily sell them to the mob for a couple extra likes and clicks. And that's how the Skinner box has trained their minds. So very sinister, very horrible thing, especially as the regime, kind of vilifies a whole new class of people. Like you said, makes explicit enemies of people who do things like just have Christian or have a cross displayed somewhere. Really, really ugly stuff. So we're gonna start working our way through some of the super chats. If you want to go ahead and ask a question of myself or the Prudentialist, feel free to do so. Before I get to some of the actual super chats, I wanted to just click on a couple comments here. So Coca-Cola here says, sovereign is he who decides on the exception. And yes, of course, Carl Schmitt there, right? So again, I hope at this point anyone watching this understands that these, the hard and fast rules that are printed down somewhere, the things in the Constitution, that kind of thing, they're only as important as the people who actually run the country. If the people who actually operate law enforcement, operate the judiciary committees, operate the DOJ, if they're the ones who decide when and how the law is applied, that is what is actually happening. That's de facto. It doesn't matter what's de jure, it matters what's de facto in a lot of these situations. And so that's particularly important. Also, we see here Kit Spicken says, the sovereign is he who sets the news cycle, which is also very important, right? A big thing that these people do, in the Soviet Union, they would alter history by erasing events, right? They go back and they remove it from the historical record. Especially today, you can't really do that. The internet makes that impossible. There's always some way to bring it back. So instead, what they do is they set the news cycle. If you can just turn things up to 11 and scream constantly about a new moral panic every 15 minutes, then you can kind of erase the past by keeping everyone in the eternal present, by just constantly shifting the focus of everyone every second of the day and demanding that they look at support the new thing, the current thing. Then you can kind of erase the past by basically just making it impossible to put events in context. It doesn't matter that protesters during the BLM riots assaulted the White House. Like, those people don't exist anymore in our history. Only January 6th existed because it's the only thing that the regime actually puts in front of its population.
Well, yeah, and it also, to make reference to Schmidt here, let's also keep in mind that this is sort of the state of the infinite exception. Some people would probably say that the pandemic is. I do think that here in the U.S., really what this is the ever-present threat of just regular white Christian people that tend to vote Republican being the ever-present threat to this democratic system. And that's something that you've been doing a good job on Twitter, is that every time you see something that's a threat to democracy, you always ask the question, what does liberal democracy mean in this example of this tweet? Which, I mean, clearly there are people that they do not want to have participatory in here. And that's something that I think is very important to keep in mind. And not only is the sovereign the one who sets the news cycle, it's also the one that sets the sort of area of record, your Wikipedia page, and so on and so forth, which is also notoriously biased.
And of course, let's also not forget, sorry, need to drink a drink there. But yeah, also sets the null hypothesis, right? The thing that has to be disproved. So if the media is constantly asserting that it's the right who is extreme, it's the right that is planning these kind of things, it's the right that is a danger all the time, if they're the ones who are forcing that into the public consciousness 24/7, then it becomes incumbent on you to disprove that. And so by setting the null hypothesis, they've already won the game, because they're not only in control of the flow of information, they're in control of what would even count as proof to void their narrative, which of course you're never allowed to actually accumulate in public.
Yeah, exactly that. And I can't help but chuckle by some that would think that, it's only about insecurity, that think that people are out to get them. I mean, it's been very clear, whether it's in the schools, whether it's the political rhetoric that we saw last night, or really for the last several years now, that this isn't about feeling insecure. It's the fact that we are in a system which does not permit individuals from trying to have their own means or have their own opinions to raise objections to this. And the fact that the AP style book, the DOJ, the Department of Homeland Security has made it very codified. There's nothing insecure about this, or to have insecurity. It is very simply clearly labeled that, yeah, you are the enemy to the state, nothing more.
All right, let's go ahead and take a look at some of these. Felix Fairmont for $2. Thank you very much. Demon theory of politics isn't rule of law. Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, rule of law is increasingly in the rearview mirror here. It's I know it's one of these things. Something people ask me all the time is, why do you repeat stuff so much, especially on Twitter? And the answer is really simple. You always have, if you're doing your job right, and a widening audience, right? And if you always pretend like everyone has heard everything you have to say, you lose people very quickly. I know a lot of you guys have been around for a long time. I'm super grateful. I'm very appreciative for that. But it's very easy for people who are kind of in our group and, kind of familiar with the creators and commentators and things kind of in our sphere, to fall into an echo chamber mentality, assuming that like everyone knows the things we know. And it's very obvious to people. I'm surprised, especially as I now increasingly interact with bigger names and kind of people with bigger audiences. how often people are unfamiliar with even kind of what we consider kind of very basic entry level understandings of certain concepts. So just remember when you're talking to people, especially as you talk to people who are unfamiliar with a lot of what we talk about, what we do, that you need to define your terms and you need to build slowly from the bottom. And there's nothing wrong with reinforcing and building kind of that understanding, because you'll be surprised that even very intelligent people who are high level professionals at kind of their field, or even maybe in this field, often are not familiar with the things you're talking about. So take the time to explain them. You'll be surprised how important that is. Let's see. Salad fork here for $5 Canadian. Thank you very much. I think A is correct about the regime completely buck breaking the left. Everything they do and advocate benefits the regime that they claim to hate. Yeah, so that's true in a sense. Um, as always, it's tricky with the definition of the phrases like the left, right? Because if you talk to, I guess, what you could call the more dissident left people, kind of the people who are disillusioned Marxists and that kind of thing, they'll say we're the real left, right? And just like, I guess, if someone accused us of having the opinions of Ted Cruz or something, we would balk. So I think it's really complicated. I think a big part of it is the eternal revolution is part of the model, right? That's a big part of left wing. The communists who are still in power still refer to themselves as revolutionaries, right? So you have to understand that even established leftism requires basically this myth of an eternal revolution. It's almost as important as like the founding fathers to the right. And so you can say that they advocate for things that benefit the regime they claim to hate, but I think they just have to claim to hate hierarchy even as part of the hierarchy. I think that's kind of required in their ideology.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I mean, it also really does depend on who you ask. I mean, I know you had that conversation with Glenn Greenwald about it, but I mean, if you were to talk to someone like Caitlin Johnstone or Caleb Maupin, like very dedicated democratic socialists that aren't actually, or that are opposed to the system, they would tell you that no, like clearly what we would call the mainstream left or your bread tube types, they do serve and advocate for the regime to a point where even people on BreadTube, like Philosophy Tube, they did work with the government. And I think AA does have a point, but it does really depend on what our parameters of the left are.
Yeah, absolutely. I always find that the terms left and right are useful. People who want to discard them, I don't agree with that. I think they are useful, but I think but they are always slippery. I think the best understanding I have really come to is the right understands the value of inequality and hierarchy. The left thinks it's evil. I think that's kind of your most basic understanding. That's uncomfortable for, I think, both sides, which maybe that is maybe why it's more useful. But if you simply tie it to different ideological or policy positions, I think the understanding is slippery. If you can understand it and it's kind of a basic starting point to which those things are then assembled around, I think that's an easier way to understand it. All right, let's see. Monothalamus, I'm sure I'm getting that wrong. Thank you very much. Oh, Sulla, where art thou? I mean, let's hope we can skip directly to Augustus. I don't know, but I hear you. Let's see. Pete Budapest for $4.99. Are we all accelerationists now, or are there some lagging indicators of a course correction? A la Chesley Bowden, and thank you. That's who got recalled in San Francisco. Thank you, Pete, for that. So I would always be very careful as describing anything as pro-accelerationist, because I am not, to be very clear. Also, I think it's important to differentiate between the Nick Land understanding of accelerationism, which is like self-exciting feedback loops, which is a theory of like it's a systems understanding of how things work, and then like the active political strategy of accelerationism, which is very different thing. I am against the latter there. I think that it's always a mistake to try to play into that kind of stuff, because A, you don't know where it's going. B, you could be doing far more damage to yourself and others. And C, like, you just shouldn't aid evil. Even if you think at the end that could bring about something good, I don't think you're ever the good guy if you're trying to like collapse the system and hurt people so that the good thing can come after. Like, I think that's always dangerous, and I don't think anyone should be should see events that way. Does that mean we don't understand that things are accelerating? Does that mean that we don't recognize when other people are taking actions that will lead to that outcome? No, but I think having the outlook or the strategy of accelerationism is a mistake.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not an accelerationist either. You don't immanentize the eschaton, and
Exactly.
you don't operate a framework or a political mechanism that could easily create an accident. To borrow from Paul Virilio a bit there, that doesn't mean that they might not course correct. I mean, like I mentioned earlier when I mentioned the recall, I think that once you start having the wild mob or the lax policy on crime start affecting your bottom line or your tax base and the people that support you and vote you in, then yeah, I mean that's sort of basic selectorate stuff in action. But Auron is absolutely right that we have to be very mindful of how things do accelerate, but not support it.
Our next one here is Selfish Neuron. Thank you very much. Will the regime last 100 years or 300 years longer? My guess would be both of those is too long. Again, as Prudentialist pointed out, there could always be someone who comes around to arrest kind of the decay, kind of freeze the revolution where it is. You could get a Stalin, I guess, on the left. But I think there's a real problem for the U.S. attempting to maintain its global hegemony with its current system. I think we're seeing kind of the consequences of globalization and radical progressive rhetoric both kind of come to their logical conclusions simultaneously, and I think that's going to be too difficult for these people to maintain. I don't think that means you'll see a big change in 5 years along those road, but I don't see it taking 100.
I think that what we call the global American empire, the gay is here to stay for as long as it wants. I do think that it'll be here for a lot longer than we would like, and that I do think that a lot of people were talking when we talk about collapse. I had a conversation with a friend named Dimes at Blood Satellite. He said, really the scariest thing is that it goes on and it just keeps getting progressively just a little less. Its quality drops a little bit every couple of years or so, and I think that we're kind of on that trajectory. I think that there might be someone to arrest it, like maybe like the recall thing, but for the time being, like it's here to stay until the trajectory or like the mechanisms and levers of power are in different hands.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we both think there's an end point, but where we think it is might be different. I think you're right that the scariest outcome is, of course, in many ways, just that, and that's the thing is, when people hear collapse, they always think Mad Max, but what you should really be thinking of is just descent into kind of the third world, or beyond. I think, like I said, I think eventually things come apart. The entire global system is a little too reliant on what has been built up at the moment. But you're very right that conditions could just continue to degrade for a very long time without actually seeing a complete break. Let's see. Restoring Order. Hey, yeah, absolutely. Again, Restoring Order has had both of us on. You should definitely go check out the channel. Has some interesting interviews and news streams, that kind of thing. So make sure you check out Restoring Order. I know Prudentialist was on there last night, so make sure that you take a look. Restoring Order for $5. Thank you very much. What long-term ramifications from the hearings? What long-term ramifications from the hearings will there be? Will they lose steam as they drag on? Thanks, gents. Yeah, I would imagine they've already kind of lost steam. As Prudentialist said, even with this kind of production, this official, primetime production, everything incredibly boring. I think you really have to be an absolute news junkie or, to to even care slightly about this. I am an absolute news junkie, and I couldn't be bothered to watch these things, even though I knew what was going to happen, right? So like I did a tweet about Mark Hamill yesterday. Man, can I bring? Hold on, let me see if I can bring up Mark Hamill, because this was just extremely embarrassing. 1 second. But why don't you give your opinion?
Sure.
Just why I'm looking for that.
Well, like I had said on his stream last night, that, even if this doesn't feel like this might be the most watched one, and I saw a tweet this morning that said it didn't get the ratings hit that it really wanted, so that this will probably be the most watched one, and then the rest of the streams or the hearings might not have as much attention. But the thing about this is that they have hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of depositions. They've got thousands of hours of video. Most of that video, they didn't even show the defendants that they had arrested. So the comparison I made on his stream last night was that this could be treated a lot like the Mueller report and the Mueller investigation, that it's just this ongoing thing that happens in the background that they can just drop in whenever they want, is this like bombshell or breaking news, revelation or whatever. Like, oh, someone said this in the Trump administration and these deposition hearings, and they can drag it out whenever it's like a really bad or a slow news day. I do think that that'll be the case. They'll lose steam, but it doesn't mean that they won't wave its poor ratings and corpse around like Weekend at Bernie's or something.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, yeah. So show you Mark Hamill here in all his incredible cringe. So yeah, this is Mark Hamill's tweet here. The tweet is like it's from like a 20-year-old, right? Like it's embarrassing. I am so ready for accountability for the violent insurrection against our government and the coup incited by Drumpf and his minions. Will you be watching? Like hashtag must see TV. And he's just sitting here like with popcorn and like cross-legged with like it's really horrible. Like like I said here, it's we're at the point where celebrities are making like bitchy hype posts about a literal show trial that they're watching, that the regime is putting on for their amusement.
I think it's the only time I've ever seen you swear on Twitter.
I think it is. Yeah, I try to keep it off there, but there's just no other way to describe it, right? Like that's exactly what it is. It's the affectations of an Instagram influencer who's like 17, and so it's just that's where it's at. I think it'll be used to destroy people's lives. Like I said, they've already they arrested Steve Bannon over this. They arrested the other gentleman whose again name eludes me. But they will continue to use this to destroy the rights of their lives of their political opponents. They'll drag it out from time to time when they kind of need this news hit, but I don't think the general population is plugged into this at all. I don't walk around talking to people at different places and hear them mentioning this trial at all. Let's see. Belphosphorus Knight for $5. Thank you very much. As Roman elite seclude themselves in their villa, chaos occurs on the people, the twilight of the Roman Empire. In a lot of ways, yeah. So a big part of this is going to be like the Brazilification, right? Like these people are going to continue to purposely do these things that are going to make the areas of the country more dangerous. They're going to incite violence from the political supporters. They're going to refuse to prosecute criminals. They're going to allow homelessness, this kind of things. And basically what's going to happen is the rich are going to be able to seclude themselves away. They're going to, retreat into gated communities. The process, of course, of gentrification, and then slowly the removal to even more elite separation from the populace, so they can kind of hide themselves from this. They'll continue to live good lives. It's going to be the middle class that pays the price, right? The ones who bought into neighborhoods they thought were safe and then slowly become subject to violence and political demonstrations and riots and these kind of things. These things are going to escape the city centers. They're going to move out into suburbs or other places, and those people will be the ones that pay the price, not the leaders.
Yeah, it's ever encroaching. Like the people that they'll always say, like, oh, when they say nice schools, that's what their phrase for white flight or gentrification. But now there is no well, where do I find a nice school? And it's just like, well, really, you've got to find one that isn't going to have some crazy person featured on libs of TikTok. And that feels ever more harder to find. So yeah, the middle class is the one that's going to get the spear end here of the stick.
Yeah, it's a really good point that you make there, because you can escape the physical like danger and of these neighborhoods, but you'll just be running to areas where your kids are more likely to get immediately indoctrinated, right? You'll just be raising the likelihood of their state sponsored indoctrination. So you have to find a safe area where then you can also have enough money to not only seclude yourself away from this stuff, but also keep your kids out of state sponsored school systems, and assuming that the private school you send them to isn't also full of this stuff. So it becomes a increasingly difficult task for anyone who isn't radically wealthy to continue to dodge all of these consequences.
Yeah, the rural urban divide has been basically destroyed by the internet. I'm not saying that there isn't significant geographic, cultural, or physical differences, but I mean, I live in a tiny enough place where there are kids that can like ride a horse to go to like the park or their local school or whatever, but it doesn't mean that they're not saying the same kind of online Zoomerisms, for real, no cap. But like, I mean, that's what it is. And so the internet kind of does really destroy a lot of that, the geography of exit.
No, absolutely. Let's see. Our next one here is from Pete. Pete Budapest again. Thank you, sir. Ideology aside, am I the only one who thought the aesthetics of last night's primetime hearing were Soviet-esque? Just the vibe alone. I mean, the fact that they were even occurring in primetime and put on by a producer. Yeah, I mean, maybe they had a better production value than Soviet show trials, but yeah, just that very fact alone does feel very much like what you're saying there, Pete. It's pretty terrifying that this is going to be a regular feature of American life now, which again is why the Republican solution of like, well, just win the next election is so tone deaf. It's like, well, even if you are allowed to win an election at this point, which is in and of itself a question, even if the system will allow you to win an election because they maybe don't want to cheat severely enough to like keep you from securing the power, you're just basically putting people into your administration who will then inevitably basically be arrested, right? Like you're basically branding yourself as the new targets for the next administration's show trials. So not only were people worried about going into these administrations in the first place because they didn't think they could get things done, now just attempting to join and being a part of the administration makes you a very high value target for these people who need political enemies to destroy in their show trials. It's a very dangerous situation because it's hard enough for Republicans to get any kind of talented people who can actually get things done inside the administrative state. Who in their right mind is going to join up when they know that inevitably they're just going to get buried in a political trial?
Yeah, and I mean, even the answer that the Republicans had to last night was, we're going to have an investigation into the investigation, which is the most politically tone deaf, but really it kind of does serve their purpose of just managing the decline at this point.
Yeah. The idea that we need to have our own show trials. Guys, you don't get it. Like, you don't understand what's happening here. Yes, you're right that's an extremely tone deaf response, but it is the only thing they really have to offer while being the controlled opposition that they are. RCW here, thank you for your donation. Keep drumming the message. Yeah, again, like I was saying, repetition isn't a terrible thing. I get it. Like sometimes people get tired of hearing certain things. You try, especially when you're putting out content, not to just do the same video 20 times. But this is something I learned in journalism, right? We had a joke, oh, you're going to write that story 30 times, right? Because when you're reporting on something, you do the initial, the government is making this, they're talking about this possibility, and then you do the next report about them drafting the bill, and then you do the report on like the appropriation, and then you do the report on the vote, and then you do the report on the passage, and then you do the report on the implication, and then you do the follow-up, and you're writing the same story. You're iterating it each time, and that sounds exhausting because it is for the people who are making it and maybe the people who are very closely following it. But actually, it's a very successful model because at each step you're adding new information, and the vast majority of people who are reading the article didn't read the last one. And so you've just got to keep that in mind, that sometimes, again, it's very important to go back because, we've said this a million times, even people are like, oh, we're tired of hearing about Yarvin or Moldbug or what, we're tired of hearing about those ideas. We've moved beyond them. It's like, well, then why are you still making the same mistakes that we warned you about 3 years ago, right? Like people don't actually always listen. And even when they do, they don't always learn the lessons. And so it's just that thing, like, don't be surprised when you need to double back on this stuff and talk about it because, it's a situation where you have to keep hammering some of that stuff home. Even things that seem very basic level to you might be a revelation to people around you. Don't forget that.
Yeah, the same also applies off Twitter with the content that you make too. Just, oh, why are they mentioning the same like political like theorist, or why are they mentioning the same like articles about the status of wheat exports? Like, well, you need to know these things because there's more information that you need to build off of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Swickles here for $2. Thank you. I have no idea how to say the name, but that's my best attempt. What's your prediction on Bruin and Dobbs? Sorry, I don't immediately know that reference. I'm sure it's very important, and I'm embarrassing myself by not knowing it. But are you familiar with what they're referencing there?
Dobbs is supposed to be the Supreme Court case itself that is supposed to overturn.
Yes.
Roe
Okay,
v. Wade,
right.
But the Bruin one I don't know off of the top of my head.
I'm
now gonna have to look it up.
I knew I had heard that name, but I didn't immediately know it was connected to it. But
it's a Second Amendment case. It's the New York State and Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, and it's regarding to here's the question being asked: whether a state's denial of petitioners' applications for concealed carry licenses for self-defense is in violation of the Second Amendment. Well, hopefully that we will have a similar ruling to the DC versus Heller thing,
Heller, yeah.
But I'm not so sure. I mean, we've known that Roberts and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh have been very tendency to flip-flop, but hopefully we get another Second Amendment win. That would be nice for New Yorkers to have concealed carry permits and defend themselves in these crazy times. And, well, we can only pray that the Dobbs decision goes the way that we'd like it to.
Yeah, I guess that's the big thing is going to be the real question is, are these tactics successful, right? Can they get a justice to flip? Is this intimidation successful? If it is, that's very bad. I think that it wouldn't be successful just because the Supreme Court wouldn't want to send the message that this kind of thing works, because of course that will only encourage further application of that tactic. But you never know. It's a whole different story when someone shows up to your house where your kids sleep and your wife sleeps with the weapon. And that's what the left is doing right now to push their agenda. So I think it's difficult. My impulse would say this court seems to be on a bit of a tear as of late, so it might side with what the conservatives would want in both of those cases. But like I said, all bets are kind of off with what the left are unleashing on the country. So difficult to predict. Maxwell Stetson for $2. Opinion on Peter Thiel. Well, as a known recipient of Thiel bucks, I can't speak badly of my patron. No, I've been accused of many things, including being an AI programmed by Peter Thiel. But honestly, I don't really know what to think of Thiel. Obviously, Thiel is throwing his weight around. He's funding some candidates that are making big waves, particularly Blake Masters and what's the other one?
JD Vance.
Thank you. Yes, hillbilly LG author, JD Vance. So his name is on the lips of many people. He was a central figure in the Vanity Fair article about kind of the new right, neo-reactionary adjacent people. Curtis Yarvin obviously lumped into that. I would imagine if there's one person who's probably motivated by a lot of what Yarvin says, Thiel does seem to be that kind of person. Obviously, he's going to continue to wield a certain amount of power. I don't think I would label him as our guy. But as always, history is also one of those forces that you don't always control, right? Great men are out there, and sometimes they are made by the events around them. And so any elite that is pushing back against the system is good news, even if it's on in small ways. But you also want to avoid having a savior complex, like many people did with people like Elon Musk, where they just immediately throw their support and their passion behind anyone who signals that they might have issues with the current situation.
Yeah, I don't know how well connected this new right or whatever Teal's doing, but I don't know how much power or punching weight it's going to have when it comes to, say, compared to previous things like the Koch brothers or other political like dynasties that could fund a lot of projects. I mean, it's cool that he got Gawker shut down all those years ago for sort of for like outing him essentially while he was in the Middle East, but I'm not so certain to put my faith in anyone. I mean, obviously, don't put your faith in princes or sons of men, but I just do. I would hold myself very cautious. But if he's going to willing to throw some money around to maybe have some people, basically call the system out for what it is, then I'm going to be tentatively supportive of it.
I mean, the right is desperately in need of patrons. Like
Yes.
the right is desperately in need of people who will just fund projects, political projects, art projects, literary projects, just for the sake of funding them, not for an immediate return on investment. That's a huge problem, especially with the conning complex. Right, is like basically the only people who can get funding are people who can do very safe work that shows immediate numbers on something that doesn't really matter. And so anyone who's willing to test the waters and put money and organization into the stuff, even if they're not 100% what we hope they would be, you got to embrace that at some level. But also while gatekeeping, what you really want is someone who will kind of turn the reins over to those with vision. But also make their visions possible. That's the ideal situation.
Hopefully, yeah.
All right, so Ludwig von Jesus for $2. Thank you for all you do, guys. Keep me sane. Well, we hope so, guys. We really appreciate your support. Really appreciate you coming out. Big crowds showing out to the streams here lately. That's been really great. Obviously, we've had amazing guests like the Prudentialist to help that happen. But we really appreciate you guys supporting. I hope we can keep you sane in these times. Let's see. Manayud Susha. I think you're just donating to try to make me say the names. Will Klaus Schwab succeed? I just did a big stream on this with Morgoth. You should definitely check that out if you have any interest in kind of our thoughts on that. We went into pretty in depth for a couple hours on Klaus Schwab and World Economic Forum and kind of the general global hegemony involved in that. So if you want to hear more in depth opinions on that, then you can do that. My I guess as quickly as possible. I think no. But they're going to cause lots of problems with massive funding and their ability to push policy in the near and midterm. So I don't think they'll succeed in the long-term sense, but I do think they'll cause plenty of pain and loss for people, especially with our outlook in the near and midterm.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. Is that while having this technocracy looking like a Bond villain, I mean, it doesn't speak for people like you and I. It's meant for those careerists and people that are willing to forego having families and children to dedicate themselves to a career or a position of power or influence. Whether or not he succeeds remains to be seen. But boy, oh boy, do things sure like they're moving in his favor in regards to skyrocketing meat prices and food storage plants having disruptions or fires happening seemingly all the time.
Absolutely. All right. The next one, Bella Phosphorus Night again for $10. Thank you very much. Well, we have the GAE show trials. Does this mean MAGA 2024 containment is a bust? Either way, I'm considering moving out of the U.S. despite its geostrategic advantages. More places feel free for a white male. A couple of things on that. First, the future of MAGA. I think Trump will run again. I think that if they try to make it illegal for Trump to run again, then that's real acceleration. That's things start getting pretty wild if they manage to do that. Trump is a useful villain for them. So even though a lot of them are foaming at the mouth and a very sincere hatred towards him, he is useful as a focal point of their hatred. They've shown themselves to be very capable of containing his ability to make changes. So I don't think that they fear him on like a policy level. The only real danger of putting him back in that office is that people really do love Trump. And I don't care what anyone tells you. They love Trump. He has their loyalty. He has their loyalty in a very deep and serious way. Even if people don't think he's a very deep and serious person, it doesn't matter. You need to understand the power of personal loyalty of a political figure. Trump is charismatic. He has a very powerful and dedicated base who will turn out for him and will listen to him. And so that's the thing they're most scared about. I think that you'll probably see Trump run. I think it would be foolish for someone like DeSantis to get in his way. But as out of control as people are right now, it's hard to predict the future with what would happen in 2024. I would also say, while I totally understand people who decide to make the move outside of the U.S., that's simply not an answer for me. I think that this is my home, and no matter what happens, I'm an American, and maybe if things get bad enough, that'll change. But as they stand now, I can't see myself going anywhere else. But
yeah, I'm of a similar opinion. I know that I think a lot of people ask that question to South Africans. Our friend Conscious Caracol gets asked that, why don't you just leave? And the same answer is the same one that we're going to give you. This is our home. I don't see myself going anywhere else. Not to say that I don't respect and understand the reasons why people do leave. I do get it. There are plenty of reasons why that might be personal to you or economically beneficial. But as an American, this is my home, and I'm going to do my best to make and set the ship right.
All right, our next one, Jimmy Thuminus for $10 Canadian. I know protests don't bring change, but is this a point where a peaceful public presence like groups appearing outside judges' houses is useful? Yeah, Jimmy. So here's the thing. I don't think so. And I know people don't like that answer because they think that means I'm telling them don't do anything, or like there's no hope for this action, that kind of thing. And that's not what I'm trying to say. But here is the reality that the right has to face. The left is more than willing to lie about you, slander you, use the power of the state, law enforcement, and the media to destroy your life. And they will do all of those things and are making it very clear in public right now that they can do that to anyone, including a Supreme Court judge. So what you're betting on when you're talking about the kind of tactic you're talking about is the optics, right? What you're betting on is you put peaceful people who are able to maintain discipline between a violent mob, or a mob that is very likely to become violent, and their target. And you're making a lot of very dangerous bets there. You're betting that the mob won't do something horrific to the people between them and their target, or that if they do, it will be portrayed in a way that is useful for you. Again, your inspiration for this is the civil rights movement, I think, even if you don't realize it. You're in your mind, there's this vision of like mean, angry racists screaming at peaceful people sitting at a lunch counter. And that changes the hearts and minds of the people, because there's no way to avoid that image and look at that image and not be compelled to oppose whatever these people are doing. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think what's going to happen is that these people can and will destroy you. Sure, we still see guys like Nick Sandmann or Kyle Rittenhouse able to get some level of justice, but I think the time for that is quickly coming to an end. I think the media can and will destroy you, and you need to understand that you're basically putting yourself in a position where even if you are successful in keeping your side completely peaceful and above reproach, the media can still find a way to manufacture a terrible story against you. They'll dig up your past. Obviously, you'll be destroyed professionally and personally. So maybe there's an optics positive situation where that happens, but I think you're putting yourself in a very dangerous. Again, I just think about the trucker protest, and if you're paying in Canadian dollars, you probably already know this, right? Like the trucker protest was probably as optics neutral as it can get, right? These people were peaceful. They were doing something that didn't hurt anyone. They were doing something that was obviously disruptive, but in a very peaceful way. Had forced the regime to come to the table, you would think, and they were just destroyed. Their bank accounts were frozen. The bank accounts of their families and friends were frozen. They were arrested, and the trucker protest is no more. So I think that's just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about direct public political action.
Yeah, I mean, you can be as optically friendly as possible, but as the Canadian trucker thing showed us, that won't stop them from putting people in there who got freshly purchased, mid-century German flags off of Amazon, where you could still see the wrinkles of the folds that they got from the packaging to wave them around. And now, I mean, as the distributor said on one of his streams, that like his wife is Canadian, and anytime that they transfer money from the US to Canada, it gets audited. So, I mean, we have to be very careful. And like I mentioned earlier today on the stream, like even the ADL and other groups are already saying that these extremist, hateful groups are being are just very polite. They don't say anything crazy or stupid. They are just polite, good-natured people, and that's what makes a terrorist for them these days. So, this is not to say that there's some benefits to political action. I just think that you just have to be very careful. And I do think that a lot of our attention should be focused on the local.
Yeah, absolutely. Felix Fairmount for $2. We can't leave the Cracker Factory. That is, of course, a reference to Nick Land's Dark Enlightenment essay. Guys, if I haven't convinced you to read Nick Land at this point, I don't know what I can do. Like, I get it. It's Nick Land. He can be impenetrable at times, but Dark Enlightenment's relatively readable. It's as readable as his work gets. So you should be checking that out.
Yes, go read it and go listen to the entire audiobook that Skeptical Waves has provided.
Yeah, absolutely. Skeptical Waves has one, and that's one I've listened to the entirety of the Open Letter and Dark Enlightenment multiple times, because there's enough there where you've really got to go through it more than once to absorb it. So interesting, good thing to do while you're mowing or washing the car, or whatever. All right, let's see. Patrick Jar for $5. Aside from churches, what other parallel institutions should we focus on building? Good question, Patrick. I like that question a lot. So I caught some flack on Twitter recently because I was like, I kept seeing the don't go to movies, don't watch sports, don't listen to music, don't buy anything from any of these companies, don't basically work for any of these companies, homeschool your kids. And look, individually, none of those are like terrible pieces of advice. Like, yeah, like if you can avoid it, you should like not work for a woke company so you're not subject to their stuff. And if you can avoid watching a movie made by people who hate you, yeah, I get it. Like I watch a lot more old stuff than I used to at this point, because if I watch anything at all, because I just don't want to watch stuff made by people who hate me. In a lot of cases, there's just franchises I used to love that I just avoid like the plague, because I just don't want to stare at the propaganda anymore. So I totally get people saying that stuff. I totally get it. But a lot of people were like, "Oh, you're saying," but I said, like, look, maybe just telling people to opt out of society is a problem. And then my second tweet was, we got to build parallel institutions so there's a culture for people to go to. It's not enough to just tell people, hey, opt out of society, and then have nowhere for them to go and no support system. If you're going to tell the people to do that, then you have to have a place for them to land. And a lot of people just only looked at the first tweet and they didn't look at the second one. So which I get it. Like, that's Twitter. I'm not going to complain about the nature of Twitter, but my point was not that like you just, that Marvel movies are like deep culture and you have to consume them. My point was, you have to have something somewhere for people to go to. So what parallel institutions should we be building? Well, we're seeing some big movement in those areas, right? It seems small now, but there are places where this is happening. You have places like the Passage Prize with Lomez, right, where he's sponsoring contests to have art created in visual mediums, poetry, essays, fictional stories. I think they're adding music to the next one. So that's a great thing you can do to support institutions, cultural institutions, guys like Zero HP Lovecraft, guys like Billy Pratt, who are writing books in this space. You can support their work. There are, of course, lots of right wing publishers at this point, kind of small right wing publishers popping up who are putting out works like AA's book, The Populist Illusion. So those are institutions. They may not seem like the biggest impact right away, but those are building blocks. You have AA providing things like his academy. You can take his courses so that you can get educated outside of the mainstream by someone who's a high level academic. We have what else do we have? We have the what's the name of the distributists? He helped put together that the Shieldings or so. I'm sorry, I forget the name of it.
Well, yeah, there's the Shieldings thing that's been coming out of the AA sphere that's helped organize various meetups in the UK. We had one earlier, this year in February. And I mean, besides churches and whatnot, I mean, it's also important to have these networks for things that are actually going to matter if things get really bad. Like if you have a background in automotive technology, you should be trying to meet up with people that can help pass those skills along, or maybe you can take that cross and up and try and teach people some of the basics for auto repair, because a lot of people don't know how to do that these days. Also, like emergency response groups, like if you live in the middle of nowhere, and how to have a group of friends that doesn't have to be explicitly political, but you guys know how to clear a road from trees, or first aid, and can take care of one another. That stuff goes a long way. And I mean, art, culture, all that stuff matters, but also so is the technical necessities, like basic mechanical work, or giving people instruction on how to better take care of themselves. There's plenty of fitness guys out there, plenty of religious advice out there, and I think we're just beginning to see it flourish, like Auron had said.
Yeah, there's of course Dr. Bennett has his group Exit, which helps people not only get out of woke corporations and start their own thing, or get put together with employment where they won't be cancelable, but also builds exactly the type of skills that Prudentialist is talking about. There, especially as a lot of these skills like automotive repair and other things wither on the vine, as a lot of people don't learn them. The people who do learn them become far more valuable and far more indispensable. So just building up that skill and passing it along, when times get hard, if you're the group that has the ability to repair cars because cars are too expensive to buy anymore because you can't really manufacture them the way you used to, you might be far more valuable and far harder for the state to focus on, and you might be more valuable to community and just practically inside your community. So those are all good suggestions. Bellaphosphorus Nicety, again, thank you very much. Is America still worth living in? It's still localized, but parallel institutions are impossible. Other countries feel more free than the US. I don't think parallel institutions are impossible. I think that's disingenuous. They couldn't be difficult. You can say that eventually the state will come for them. You're probably right about that. But it's far from impossible. You can set these up all over the place right now. They can still exist. It's difficult, but they can exist. Are other countries more free than the US? I mean, that's possible. I can't think of a ton, but there are probably places that, again, you could go to. But I think, again, the Prudentialist answer, I think, will be the same as it was before. I think his relation to South Africa and Conscious Caracol is really good. Conscious Caracol and Rob and all of them, they're in a very difficult position down there, but that's their home, and they're not going anywhere. So they're doing what they can with what they have. I don't hold it against anyone who says I need to take my family to a different place. I understand it, but that's not where I am. I don't think things might get bad enough. I might change my tune, but right now I don't think that's where I'm at. Let's see. Did you have anything you want to add, Prudentialist?
No. That was perfect.
All right. So Heath there for $5. Left is used to character assassination succeeding. That's why when it failed, they simply dropped the character. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Like I said, when soft power fails, they've only got one thing left, and they're resorting to roundabout ways of doing that right now, ways that can have low accountability for them. But that's a dangerous game. It'll work for them in the short term, but there will be a degradation of society if nothing else, and that's very costly.
Heath, that super chat was so good. I know that you're a longtime fan of Auron, because if that wasn't a super chat, I would have thought that was just one of Auron's tweets being read back to us.
No, that is a very good. Let's say you should tweet that out, Heath. If you should, that's a good. I have to tell the Prudentialist, for those who don't know, like he'll say something witty in chat, and I'll be like, you have to tweet that out now. Like it's important. Let's see. Pete again for $5. Thank you. The right doesn't have a funding problem. It's the things that they are funding are just beyond cringe and stuck in 80s Reagan nostalgia. Well, yeah, that's what I mean, Pete. Like, you're right. Like, there is money out there. Though I will say it's not the same. You have to understand, you know who's really good on this is Raboy. What's his
David Reboy?
Yes, thank you. He's really good on this. He says this all the time. He's like, look, the left just pays people to be on Twitter. They just pay people to be on YouTube. I mean, look at someone like ContraPoints. Puts out a video a year, maybe, when ContraPoints isn't like directly saying the kind of stuff that I tap signs about. And they make like $1 million, right, for just being left wing. The right doesn't do this, right? The right does nothing close. That's it. There is funding on the right, and to us it seems like a lot of money, but compared to the funding on the left, it's pocket change. So it would, if the right was putting just a small percentage of its money in more useful places, again, places where they could turn the reins over to people who have vision and aren't trapped in kind of this Koch brothers mentality of political donation and funding and structure, they'd be in a much better shape. So I think you're definitely right that the things they're funding are beyond cringe and stuck in 80s Reagan nostalgia. And that's what I hope to fix at some level by building blue check bridges, right? There's a reason I'm in dialogue, and I try to talk to people. I try to bring us to some level of understanding. Does that get us anywhere? I don't know. Maybe not, but I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, if the money wasn't being spent on trying to create zombie Reagan, there'd be maybe 50 more Auron MacIntyres on Twitter doing the work that needs to be done, which is proof that Auron's not getting any money like that, because if that were the case, there'd be like 50 of them, but we've only got one.
Yeah, if anyone can get me Thiel bucks, I'll be happy to take them. If anyone if anyone can put me in contact with Peter, I'm more than happy to take that meeting. But right now, sadly, I appreciate your support, but that's all I get. No Thiel bucks here. Let's see. Again, no hope of pronouncing this correctly. Karatakos Stasi, maybe. Sorry. Thank you for your
Karatakos Eustace.
Okay, I will take it. Thank you for that. Hey, Latvia here. All of this GEA, I think we're going with GAE there, is slowly trickling down even to our ex-Soviet countries. Recently, the Supreme Court authorized homosexual partnerships as families equal to straight ones. Yeah, actually, another person who talks about this a lot is Alex Kashuda, because she's over in Transylvania, of all places. And she talks about like the only thing that like women over there talk about is like abortion politics in Alabama. So yeah, the GAE is everywhere. It dominates conversation. It truly is writing the storyline for large chunks of even not even the West at this point, but former Soviet bloc countries. So unfortunately, its reaches far. Though I'll be talking about this tomorrow with Malcolm Keown's Tinkzorg, for those who are familiar, because he just had a piece over at Compaq about this. He's got a take on this, which I agree with halfway. So we'll kind of be talking about that tomorrow, about kind of the reach of the empire, especially when it comes to those issues. Let's see. Mana Yud is back, asking for white pills. Well, man, I have to be very careful. The AP has told me that if you talk about pills, you could be a very serious threat. Yeah, I mean, it's always mixed, right? Unfortunately, these things are always mixed. The good news is that a lot of their tactics are falling apart. We can see them because they're falling apart. They're being forced to use more unstable techniques because they're falling apart. But that's all long term. This is good news. Short term, this is very bad news, right? And so white pills long term, in that that kind of power is lost to them and they can't wield it anymore, which is good news in the long term. But the short term, that means they're going to probably do some very ugly stuff to try to maintain power. I will say this, and I say this very often, but I really do mean it. Guys, the things around you that are happening in the world do obviously affect you. But at the end of the day, you are capable of living a good life. You are capable of being a happy person. You are capable of being a person who has a life of meaning and purpose. Um, it's not just cleaning up your room. I'm not going to just give you the Jordan Peterson here, but that's a big part of it. You, at the end of the day, have to take charge of things. You gotta keep yourself physically, fit. You've got to keep your spiritual life in check. You got to be in your relationship with God needs to be strong. You need to be looking to start a family if you have that opportunity. If you already have one, you have to work hard at caring for your wife and your children. You have to work within your community, and all these things will bring meaning to your life. They will make your life worth living. Just because you're in hard times doesn't mean you can't have a meaningful life. In fact, it might mean you have a higher chance of having a meaningful life in certain respects. I'm not saying anyone wishes to be in this part of the cycle, but that doesn't mean there isn't meaning to be found there. I've lived through some really difficult stuff. I know what it's like to not know how you're going to make it to tomorrow. But I can tell you, if you keep your eye on the goal and you are following the things that are good and beautiful and true, there is meaning there. There is hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And keep in mind that, a lot of these things do affect you. Auron makes a good point. You still have some agency, and the best form of revenge, so to speak, is the best way you want to, bite your thumb at somebody is really just to live the best possible life that you can. There's a reason why all those dissident Twitter accounts say that they lie to you and they want you dead. By your existence and by staying here and holding on to the things that you believe that are good and beautiful and true, you're already just making these people seethe, and it's a good start. But we can do better, and we have to do the things that we can to break bread with our neighbors, to build families and strong networks. So you've been given the really nasty prognosis, but that doesn't mean that we can't work towards being part of a cure of some form or fashion.
Absolutely. Christian Hawkins here for $5. Don't forget, Harvard was a church school. The church can be much more robust parallel institution than just Sunday mornings. And yeah, that's definitely true, right? Like, church is, of course, about community, and it's not just about going there and singing on Sunday mornings. And that might be hopefully something that is something more churches start to understand again as things fall apart. One of the reasons that the government has grown to where it is that churches don't perform the functions they used to. Now, don't get me wrong, the state will come down on churches. They already have, obviously, during things like COVID. And if churches are rivaling their power, they'll continue to do so. But at some point, you hope that people in leadership positions in the church understand that they need to grow things more than just the message on Sunday morning, and more than just necessarily the social aspect. There needs to be the educational aspect. There needs to be growing leadership and intellectual pursuits as well, and that those are all things the church can do when their mind is there.
Yeah, absolutely. And also take advantage of who's in your parish or your congregation. I am a part of an IRL book club with the men of my parish, where we read a lot of the classics to make ourselves, as my friend says in the parish, to make ourselves better men. So we have to enrich ourselves. And I mean, working with your pastor or your priest or whoever to lead that charge is something that I think they would really, really welcome. So you're absolutely right, Mr. Hawkins.
And Mr. Hawkins, again, thank you. On funding art, I recommend reading Silicon Meridian by James Poulos, Right Patronage by Lola Salem, and The Tom Wolfe Model by Michael Anton. Yes, all of those can be found in IM 1776's first in print issue. I've done a number of pieces now for IM 1776's online outlet, but they also just put out their first in print. It's very nice. It's got the quality of a very nice magazine, but it's put together in a book. So like it's laid out very nicely, has beautiful artwork, very thoughtful
Very
in the
good.
way it's visually represented. Yes, and it also has a number of different essays that you can only read inside of it. I'm just finishing it up now because they sent me a copy. I really like it. They're doing great work over at IM 1776. So obviously you should be reading their online stuff, and also if you can, being able to purchase the print version, I think is well worth your time. Let's see. Scratchy McDump Waffle for $2. I like hearing people say my name. Absolutely. I'm glad I could help you there. Thank you very much for your donation. Let's see. I think that's everybody. We made it through. All right, guys. Well, before we go, a couple things I want to bring to your attention. Obviously, you should again be subscribed to the Prudentialist. So if you are not subscribed to the Prudentialist, I put his YouTube link and his Twitter below in the description. And then he's got to find my friends on there, so you can follow that and just get all of his links there. Is there anything you want to show Prudentialist that people should know about coming up, streams, anything?
Yes. Once again, thank you so much, Auron, for coming on, and thank you for letting me know when you're streaming tomorrow, because there's been a lot of discussion about art and what we need to do about art in today, especially for those that aren't on the left. So I'm interviewing a friend of mine by the name of Stained Haynes. He does a magazine called Carlson Women, and we're going to talk about zine culture and how that stuff is important and how we can propagate our own art and creations. So once Auron is finished streaming tomorrow, you're starting at what, again, 1 o'clock, right?
1 o'clock, yep.
Yeah, so 2 hours later, 3 o'clock Eastern, I will be live tomorrow talking about magazines, art, and what we can do about it. So that's what I've got going on.
So definitely make sure that you're setting your time for that. We'll have a Saturday afternoon full of content for everyone there. Also want to let everyone know that I just started a Substack called The Total State. I've been putting together a series of essays that are kind of proto book chapters here, and I'm going to be working my way through them on the Substack. So the first piece is out now. That one's free for everybody. Give you a taste of what's going to be going into it. So if you would like to go ahead and check that out, I put the link in the description for the Substack. I encourage everybody, because I'll probably be using that more for my quick hit stuff that's longer than a tweet, but I don't want to turn probably into a full video. And then I'll be releasing like these chapters as well on a regular basis as for paying subscribers on there. I also am putting the once a month subscriber only video for people who kind of go the extra mile and go to the founder subscription. If you are someone who's already supporting me on Subscribestar, don't worry. I'll also be posting any of the paid posts there. I'll mirror the post there. So if you want to catch those, you'll get them either way. So whether you're supporting me through Subscribestar or Substack, you'll still be getting the content. So whatever choice. I just know a lot of people like rather Substack. So if you want to go there, I also want to thank some people from my Subscribestar who helped me out in a big way. Easter Worshipper, AWXYZ, Santa, 9901, Nurkesh, and user E042530. I want to thank all you guys for being big helps on Subscribestar. If you want to get the exclusive content, you want to be thanked on streams or videos, make sure you go to the Subscribestar there as well. And of course, if you haven't subscribed or anything like that to the channel, of course, go ahead and do that now. I want to thank everybody who showed up to the stream. It was great talking to everybody. We had some great questions. I want to thank the Prudentialist for coming on. Always a great co-host.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm glad that you got Santa himself to support you on Subscribestar. I know he's a very busy man come Christmas time.
It's kind of a big deal. I mean, it's the Donald Trump Jr. follows and the Adam Baldwins. Those are nice, but Santa, I mean, that's it's the big man.
Yeah,
So,
Teal Bucks has got nothing in the big man in the red suit.
yeah, exactly. So really appreciate your support, guys. Thanks for coming by. Great discussion, and as always, we'll talk to you next time.